Okay, class, we're going to touch very briefly on the geographic origins of the Industrial Revolution. Now, you could maybe spend an entire semester on this subject and then continue to study it for the rest of your life, but I'm going to try to just talk about it here for a couple minutes to give us a better concept of how ideas spread from England that reformed Europe and the contemporary world eventually. Okay, so things started off in the manufacturing industry. Now, what manufacturing used to be, it was man-made. It was a human that would create something, but it began in the millenaries and in the looms where machinery was begun to be developed that could increase the productivity and speed of weaving and looming processes for textiles. Later, you had the introduction of coal, better mining and refinement techniques, and basically some interesting consolidation of land and ownership in concentrated collieries were being developed through certain types of baronies and land ownership processes. Sometimes serfs of the land were being employed often in slave labor to gather stuff. If you look at like some of these Scottish collieries and different places in Wales. But going forward, we had essentially the change in motive power, where there were no longer beasts of burden that were doing things, or humans, or previously water, such as in a windmill type of a process. But we further hoisted these combustible processes to develop motive force with coal. This really gave great innovation to the metallurgy industry, and then we could build, stronger and better steel. And this advanced us further along than we'd been since the Iron Age with some of our metallurgy capabilities. And going forward, this enhanced motive force further. We went from steam engines and then eventually ditching cordwood and wood burning locomotion to encapsulate coal, which was readily available, particularly in places like Wales. So you see large segments of the Welsh workforce in this time started to be employed in coal mines. So we see how this eventually restructures the entire segments of the industry. And no longer do you have individual craftspeoples and gilded peoples who are weaving and sewing. Large export of England was always wool. But you now have machinery that can do this in mass production scale. So you get total changes in scale of production, and this affects cost and distribution possibility. Okay. You then look at the changes and innovations in the railroad system, and beginning in England, it eventually spreads across England and develops itself quite firmly entrenched there. Now, as we can see, emanating from England in the Midlands and in the coal-strong areas, we see it eventually reaching the Ruhr Valley in Western Europe. And the Industrial Revolution kind of spreads as an innovation to coal-rich areas of Western Europe. Why is this? Because they can then use that combustible force to power their own motive fuel for locomotion or for various types of hoists or different types of industries, which can begin to power some of these production. Now you look at it spreads, and it actually reaches the Mediterranean, Southern European world later. So you can kind of see, not only can you have explanations to previous economic geographies in Europe and in Germany, like the Hanseatic Trading League, where there had been kind of capital deposits in particular urban areas where trade had proliferated. And these followed these old relic patterns that had been established all the way back, even tracing itself to Roman times and probably prior to that, where cottage industries had been kind of already established, where craftspeople existed, and these responded to the environment and resource availability in many cases. So anyways, you see some of these innovations spreading into mainland Europe in the later part of the 19th century. And this is about when it starts to reach America as well. And America has so many resources of its own. I mean, we have anthracite mines at the East Coast, and eventually there's bituminous coal, which is underlaid across large swaths of the country, and most of the state of Iowa, actually. And we can kind of get a sense of, too, the uneven development of Europe when we look at how long it takes to get to Eastern Europe, and the fact that Russia does not receive a lot of these Industrial Revolution technological advances until like 100 years later. Now, this can also go a long way to explain some of the political geography and a lot of the social stratification geography when you look at serfs that continue to exist and work the land in Russia when technology had not yet necessarily reach them for some of these different types of economic activities. So we can kind of see this emanation pattern leaving England in the Midlands after England has about a 50-year head start on everybody, and then reaching the rest of Europe, mostly in Western Europe, and then later diffusing into Southern and Eastern Europe, and lastly, Russia.